My name is Jessica Monroe. I am 33 years old. The day I found out my parents had cut me out of their will, I felt the ground vanish beneath my feet. They handed everything to my brother. But his inheritance, it didn't last long, and I never lifted a finger. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment, where are you watching from? Growing up in our small North Carolina town felt like living in two different houses under the same roof. There was the house my brother, Caleb, lived in, and then there was the one I lived in. In his house, the lights were always bright. Laughter was easy. Praise was handed out like candy for the smallest thing. In my house, the lights were dimmer. The air was heavy with unspoken expectations. Praise was something you had to fight for, to bleed for, and even then, it was given quietly, like they didn't want anyone to overhear and think I was getting a big head. Our parents, Richard and Mary Monroe, loved us both. I have to believe they did, in their own way. But their love was unequal. It was a scale that had been permanently tilted from the day Caleb was born. He was the golden child, their charming, easygoing son. He was 2 years younger than me, but he'd always seemed to have life figured out in a way I never did. He could walk into a room and own it with a lazy smile. He could fail a test and spin a story so convincing that our parents would end up blaming the teacher. He got away with everything, and they loved him for his cleverness, for the easy way he moved through the world. I was the opposite. I was serious. I was a planner. I made lists. My mom used to sigh and run a hand through her hair, saying, "Jessica, you think too much. You carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. Just relax." But I couldn't relax. How could anyone relax? I saw how the world actually worked. I saw the stack of bills on the kitchen counter that grew thicker at the end of the month. I knew that things didn't just happen. You had to make them happen. You had to work and worry and plan. From as early as I can remember, the favoritism was the wallpaper of our house. It was just there, in every room, in every conversation. When I was 10, I spent an entire summer saving up my allowance to buy a new bicycle. I did extra chores without being asked. I collected soda cans to take to the recycling center. I counted every single penny. The day I finally bought it, a simple blue Schwinn, I felt a pride so deep it made my chest ache. I had earned it. I had worked for it. A week later, for his 8th birthday, my parents rolled out a brand new mountain bike for Caleb, complete with 10 speeds and shock absorbers. It was shiny and black and looked like something a professional would ride. It was a surprise gift. He rode it twice around the block, complained that the seat was uncomfortable, and then left it in the side yard to rust. When I tried to talk to my mom about it, my voice small and tight with injustice, she just shook her head, not even looking up from the sink full of dishes. "It was his birthday, Jessica. Don't be selfish. Your bike is perfectly fine." It was always like that. My feelings were selfishness. My observations were jealousy. My needs were ingratitude. In high school, the gap between us widened into a canyon. I worked every weekend at the local diner, the Corner Spot. My hands always smelled of coffee and grease, but every dollar I earned went into a savings account for college. I knew my parents wouldn't be able to pay the full tuition, not for me anyway. And I was determined to go somewhere, to be someone. I studied hard. My grades were nearly perfect. I joined the debate team because I thought it would look good on applications. I did everything right. Caleb coasted. He did just enough to get by. His report cards were a sea of C's, which my parents called a sign of a well-rounded social life. His afternoons were spent with friends, not at a part-time job. The money for his movie tickets and new clothes just appeared, handed over by my dad with a wink and a "don't tell your mother." When I once asked my dad why I had to work for everything and Caleb got it for free, he just patted my shoulder with a heavy hand. "He's a boy, Jess. It's different. He needs to have a social life." The biggest fight we ever had about it was the summer before I left for college. It was a hot, humid August night. I had saved up thousands of dollars, but I was still short for the first semester's tuition at the university I'd gotten into. A good school, 3 hours away. I sat my parents down at the kitchen table with my financial aid forms, my acceptance letter, and my savings account statement. I laid it all out, a neat and orderly presentation of my hard work and my shortfall. I asked if they could help me with the rest. My dad, Richard, picked up the papers, his brow furrowed. He frowned. "This is a lot of money, Jessica." "I know," I said, my voice trembling a little despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "But I've worked so hard for this. I have a partial scholarship, but it doesn't cover everything. This is my dream." My mom, Mary, stirred her iced tea, the clinking of the spoon against the glass loud in the tense silence. "We just don't have it right now," she said, her eyes fixed on the swirling liquid, refusing to meet mine. A hot, bitter sting started behind my eyes. I knew it wasn't true. Just the week before, they had bought Caleb a used Ford Ranger for his 16th birthday. It wasn't brand new, but it was a truck, a whole vehicle. I didn't even have a car. I had been taking the bus to work for 2 years. "You bought Caleb a truck," I said, my voice quiet but firm. My mom finally looked up, her expression turning cold and defensive. "That's completely different. He needs to be able to get around. He has football practice." "And I don't?" I asked, my voice rising, the control I was holding onto slipping. "I need to get to college. I need an education so I can get a good job. Isn't that more important than a truck he's just going to use to drive his friends to the lake?" That's when my dad's palm slammed down on the table, making the glasses jump. "That is enough, Jessica. I am sick and tired of your jealousy. Everything with you is a competition. He's your brother. Family means sacrifice. You're the older one. You should understand that by now." Sacrifice. That was the word they always used, their shield and their sword. But it felt like I was the only one ever being asked to bleed. I ended up taking out more student loans. I went to college and worked 2 jobs the entire time. One was in the campus library, a quiet, dusty haven where I could study between shelving books. The other was waiting tables at a busy Italian restaurant off campus, where I'd come home late, exhausted, my feet throbbing and my clothes smelling of garlic, and fall into bed. Caleb, meanwhile, went to a state school just an hour from home. My parents paid his tuition in full. They co-signed the lease on his apartment. They sent him money every week for groceries and expenses. He joined a fraternity and spent most of his time partying. He called me once, his voice slurred with alcohol from some beach party during spring break. "Hey, Jess, you should see this place. It's insane. You should totally come down." I was sitting in my tiny cinder block dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and highlighted notes. I had a major economics exam the next day. "I can't, Caleb. I have to study, and I have to work in the morning." He laughed, a careless, booming sound. "Dude, you're always working. You're too serious. You need to live a little." I hung up the phone and cried. Not because I wanted to be at a beach party, but because he didn't even have the capacity to understand my world. He didn't have to. He was floating through life on a raft our parents had built for him. I was treading water in a storm with no land in sight. I graduated with honors. I got a decent entry-level job as a junior accountant in a small firm an hour away. I moved into a small apartment and began the slow, arduous climb of paying off my mountain of student loan debt. I was proud of what I had built for myself. It was mine. I had earned every splinter of it. But whenever I went home for holidays, the dynamic snapped right back into place. Caleb was the center of attention. His stories about his fraternity pranks were hilarious. His minor problems were treated like major crises. My promotions at work, my hard-won achievements were met with a simple, distracted, "That's nice, dear." I tried to believe that deep down they were proud of me. I tried to believe that they loved me just as much, but just had a different, quieter way of showing it. I told myself that lie for years, patching it up every time it started to tear. Until the day of the will reading, the day the lie was ripped to shreds, and I was left with nothing but the cold, ugly truth. My grandmother was the one person in the family who always truly saw me. She was my dad's mom, a woman of few words but sharp, intelligent eyes that didn't miss a thing. She'd send me $20 bills in the mail sometimes in college, tucked inside a greeting card with a little note that said, "For you. Don't tell your mother." She'd call me on Sunday afternoons and ask about my classes, and she'd really listen, asking follow-up questions. When I told her I had passed my final exams, I could hear the genuine pride in her voice, a warmth my own mother's voice never held. She'd say, "I knew you would, Jessica. You've got grit." When she passed away at 85, it was a quiet, expected end to a long life. The funeral was sad, but it was also a celebration of her. The whole family came from all over. I saw relatives I hadn't seen in years. Through all the handshakes and hugs, I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest. My one true ally was gone. A week after the funeral, we were called to her lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I wasn't expecting much. My grandmother didn't have a lot of money, but she had her house, the one my dad grew up in, and a lifetime of sentimental things. I hoped for a piece of her old jewelry, or maybe one of her photo albums, something to hold on to remember her by. The lawyer's office was cold and formal, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. The chairs were stiff leather and uncomfortable. I sat between my parents. Caleb sat on the other side of my dad, tapping his foot impatiently, checking his phone. He was already talking about how he wanted to get back to the city for a concert that night. The lawyer, a grim-faced man named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat and began to read from the document. It was mostly standard legal language, dry and emotionless. He went through her small list of possessions. A few pieces of furniture were left to her church. A small sum of money was left to a distant cousin in another state. Then he got to the main part of the estate. "And as for my primary estate," he read, his voice flat, "which includes the family home located at 123 Maple Street, the surrounding land and all associated investment accounts, currently valued at approximately $2 million, I bequeath it in its entirety to my beloved grandson, Caleb Monroe." The room was silent for a moment. My mind struggled to process the words. I felt a confusing mix of shock and a sharp, stinging disappointment. My grandmother had left everything to Caleb? It didn't make any sense. She had always been so meticulously fair. But then Mr. Henderson continued, adjusting his glasses. "This will was updated 3 months ago on April 14th at the request of the deceased, and co-signed by her son, Richard Monroe, and his wife, Mary Monroe, who held power of attorney due to her failing health." My head snapped toward my parents. Power of attorney. They had updated the will. Not my grandmother. Them. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over me. I looked at my dad. He was staring straight ahead at the wall, his jaw tight. I looked at my mom. She was looking down at her perfectly manicured hands folded in her lap. "What about Jessica?" I whispered. The words felt thick and foreign in my throat. The lawyer looked down at the document, flipping a page. He scanned it briefly. "There is no mention of Jessica Monroe in the final version of the will." Nothing. Not a photo album, not her favorite rocking chair, not a single dollar. I had been erased. The ground didn't just vanish from beneath my feet. It felt like the entire universe had tilted on its axis and I was sliding off into a black, empty void. The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. I couldn't breathe. I looked at my parents, my eyes begging them for some explanation, some sign of regret, anything. What I saw instead was a smirk. It was tiny, a fleeting, ugly little twitch at the corner of my mother's lips. My father had a look of grim, righteous satisfaction on his face, as if he had just performed a difficult but necessary duty. "We thought it was for the best," my dad said, his voice low and steady, meant only for me to hear. "You're strong, Jessica. You've always been so independent. You'll figure your life out without handouts." Handouts. He called an inheritance from the grandmother who adored me a handout. Caleb, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with excitement. He leaned back in his chair, a triumphant, almost manic grin spreading across his face. "Wow," he said, letting out a short laugh. $2 million. I can do a lot with that. I am going to make that money multiply. You guys will see." He looked over at me then, and his eyes weren't kind. They were full of a gloating pity, a look that said, "You lose. Tough break, sis." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, but my mind was screaming. I just sat there as the lawyer finished up, his voice droning on about legal procedures. I felt the collective stare of my family. They weren't looks of sympathy. They were looks of justification. They had done this, and they were proud of it. Somehow, I managed to stand up on legs that felt like they were made of glass. I didn't say a word. I didn't look at any of them. I walked out of the office, out into the bright afternoon sun that felt like a slap in the face. I got into my 10-year-old Honda and just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. It wasn't just about the money. It was never just about the money. It was the brutal, undeniable, soul-crushing message they had sent. You are not one of us. You are not worth anything to us. You are and always have been on your own. They had taken my grandmother's love for me, the one pure and unconditional thing I had in that family, and they had twisted it into a weapon to deliver their final, deepest cut. And in that moment, in the sterile quiet of that lawyer's office, they had broken something inside of me that I was terrified I would never know how to fix. In the weeks that followed, the betrayal didn't just sit there like a dull ache. It became a living, breathing thing that my family actively fed and paraded around. They didn't try to hide what they had done or show any remorse. They celebrated it. The first public display was the new car. Not for Caleb, but for my mother. It was a brand new Lexus SUV, pearl white, the kind of car she always used to call pretentious. Caleb posted a picture on social media of my mom standing next to it in their driveway. It had a giant red bow on the hood. The caption read, "First order of business, treating the people who always believed in me. Love you, Mom and Dad." The money wasn't even out of probate yet, tied up in legal processes, but they were already spending it, taking out loans against the estate's value. The inheritance, my grandmother's life savings, was being treated like a lottery win. I saw the picture on my phone and felt a wave of acid reflux burn my throat. This was a statement. This was a victory lap, and they were making sure I had a front row seat. I had to know why. I needed to hear it from them, to their faces. I drove to their house one evening after work, my stomach in knots. The new Lexus was gleaming in the driveway, a monument to my exclusion. I walked up to the front door and knocked, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mother answered, a flicker of surprise in her eyes before it was replaced by a cool, practiced composure. Her smile was tight and unnatural. "Jessica? What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk," I said, my voice hoarse. I just stepped inside before she could stop me. The house smelled the same, of lemon polish and my dad's aftershave, but it felt different. It felt like enemy territory. We stood in the living room, the same room where we had countless Christmases and birthday parties. It felt like a museum of a life that was no longer mine. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Why did you take me out of Grandma's will? Her will. She crossed her arms, her posture becoming rigid and defensive. We didn't take you out, Jessica. We made a decision based on what was fair. Fair? The word came out as a choked laugh. How is giving everything to Caleb and nothing to me fair? You chose to live your own life, she said, her voice as cold and sharp as ice. You moved away for college. You got your own job. You were so determined to be independent, to prove you didn't need us. Caleb stayed close. He helps your father with the yard. He's here for dinner every Sunday. He deserves it. He's the one who is truly part of this family. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, each one coated in years of resentment. You chose to live your own life, as if my strength and self-reliance was a betrayal, as if I had abandoned them when all I had ever wanted was for them to see me, to be proud of me. I went to college to build a life, Mom, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and a desperate need to make her understand. A life I thought you would be proud of. I call. I visit for holidays. It's not like I disappeared off the face of the earth. It's not the same, she said, turning away from me to straighten a picture on the wall, a symbolic act of putting things in her own perfect order. Caleb understands that family comes first. The conversation was over. There was nothing more to say. She had laid out their twisted logic, a funhouse mirror reflection of reality that I could never untangle. In their eyes, my strength was a flaw, and his lifelong dependence was a virtue. The humiliation only got worse. A few weeks later, my mom called and invited me to a family dinner. I was hesitant, but a small, foolish, hopeful part of me thought it might be an olive branch, a chance to start healing. I was wrong. It was a performance. A show. For the rest of the family, to prove that everything was normal, that they were benevolent rulers and I was their grateful, if slightly wayward subject. The entire dinner, Caleb held court. He talked endlessly about his grand plans. He was going to invest in a friend's tech startup. He was thinking of buying a boat. He was planning a trip to Europe for the spring. My father hung on his every word, offering unsolicited advice, his chest puffed out with vicarious pride. At one point, Caleb looked across the table at me, a smug, oily grin on his face. You know, Jess, you're so good with numbers and all that boring stuff. When my empire gets big enough, maybe I'll hire you as my assistant. Keep the books for me. My dad chuckled into his napkin. Now there's an idea. Keep it in the family. My fork clattered onto my plate. The sound was deafening in the sudden lull. I looked around the table. My aunts and uncles were smiling awkwardly, suddenly fascinated by their mashed potatoes. My mother was watching me, her eyes narrow, daring me to react, daring me to be the too serious, ungrateful daughter she always said I was. I felt the blood rush to my face. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. He wasn't just enjoying his good fortune, he was actively enjoying my pain. And my parents were letting him. They were encouraging it. I pushed my chair back and stood up. Thank you for dinner, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, but I have to go. Already? My mother asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. You barely touched your food. I'm not hungry anymore, I said. I walked out of the dining room, past the gallery wall of family photos, pictures of a happy, smiling family that felt like a profound lie. As I drove home, the tears I had been holding back finally came. It was a quiet, hopeless kind of crying. The kind that comes when you realize something is truly over. I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I was the family joke, the cautionary tale. the one who got nothing. I made a decision that night, a quiet, solemn vow to myself. I couldn't keep showing up for this abuse. I couldn't keep hoping they would change into the family I needed them to be. They had made their choice, loud and clear. Now I had to make mine. I decided to step away, not with a dramatic announcement or a slammed door, but in silence. I would stop calling. I would stop trying to make plans. I would stop trying to earn a place at a table where I was no longer welcome. I would just fade away. Stepping away in silence was one thing. The reality of being pushed away was another. The world suddenly felt very cold and very empty. My life became a stark, bleak contrast to the one Caleb was so eagerly flaunting. While I was carefully budgeting for groceries, calculating every dollar, and stressing about my student loan payments, his life was a nonstop highlight reel on social media. One week it was pictures from a ski trip in Aspen, all champagne and ski lodges. The next, he posted a video of his new sports car, a cherry red convertible he definitely didn't need. He threw lavish parties at the family estate, my grandmother's house, and posted photos of dozens of people drinking champagne on the lawn where I used to have picnics and catch fireflies. Every post felt like a personal, calculated insult. He was burning through my grandmother's memory, turning her legacy of hard work and careful saving into a backdrop for his shallow, extravagant life. And my parents were right there with him, smiling in the photos, looking proud of their successful son. The whispers started soon after. In a small town, secrets don't stay secret, but the truth gets twisted along the way. Relatives I'd known my whole life would see me in the grocery store and give me a wide berth, or they'd offer a tight-lipped, pitying smile that was worse than being ignored. I was at a church potluck, a stupid sense of duty having dragged me there, when I overheard my own cousin talking to an old neighbor. I don't know what Jessica did, but it must have been something terrible for Richard and Mary to cut her out like that. The narrative had been set, and I wasn't there to defend myself. In the story my family told the world, I was the villain, the cold, difficult daughter who had done something unforgivable to be cast out. It was easier for people to believe that than to believe that my parents, such pillars of the community, could be so cruel. The holidays were the worst. The first Thanksgiving after the will reading, I waited by the phone all day. A part of me, a small, wounded, foolish part, hoped for a call, an invitation, anything. My phone stayed silent. I spent the afternoon in my tiny apartment, eating a frozen lasagna and watching the parade on TV, trying to ignore the cavernous pit in my stomach. I imagined them all at the big dining table in my grandmother's house, laughing and eating, not even noticing I was gone. On Christmas morning, I tried to be the bigger person. I called my mom's cell phone. I just wanted to say Merry Christmas. I wanted to pretend for 3 minutes that we were still a family. The phone rang and rang, each ring echoing in the silence of my apartment. No answer. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was the point? They were actively erasing me, call by call, holiday by holiday. My financial struggles felt heavier than ever, magnified by the knowledge of Caleb's immense wealth. I was working hard, but I was just getting by. Then my car broke down. The mechanic said it would be $600 to fix the transmission. $600 might as well have been $1 million. I had an old debt from college, a small loan that I had given Caleb. It was only about $500. He had been short on rent one semester and had called me, desperate, promising to pay me back as soon as he could. He never did. One night, feeling desperate and angry and cornered, I decided to call him. He had $2 million. Surely he could pay back the $500 he owed me. He answered the phone, his voice loud with background music. He was clearly at another one of his parties. "Jess, what's up?" he shouted over the noise. "Hey, Caleb," I said, trying to keep my voice even and businesslike. "I need to talk to you about that money I loaned you in college." He went quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a short, sharp, dismissive laugh that cut right through me. "You're calling me about that? Seriously? That was like 5 years ago." "I know, but you said you'd pay me back, and I could really use it right now," I said, hating how small and needy I sounded. "Just come on," he said, his tone dripping with condescending pity. "Things are a little tight right now, believe it or not." I was speechless. Tight? He was standing in a house worth a fortune, had just bought a sports car, and was telling me things were tight? "Don't worry," he said, his voice smug and magnanimous. "I am about to close this huge investment deal. It's going to be massive. Once that comes through, I'll send you your little $500, okay? I gotta go." He hung up before I could say another word. That was it. That was my rock bottom. It wasn't just about the money or the exclusion. It was the complete and utter lack of respect, the laughter, the casual dismissal of my very real struggles while he lived a life of fantasy built on a foundation I should have been a part of. I sat there in the dark of my apartment, the silence of the phone echoing in my ears. I felt utterly and completely alone, discarded, like a piece of trash that had been thrown out and forgotten. For the first time in my life, I felt truly hopeless. The fight had gone out of me. I felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of a life I was never meant to be a part of. They had won. They had finally and completely broken me. For a few weeks, I just existed. I was a robot. I went to work. I came home. I paid my bills. I ate toast for dinner. The world had lost its color. I was adrift in a sea of gray, every day the same as the last. Then one night, something shifted. I was sitting at my kitchen table, my laptop open, mindlessly scrolling through social media. And there it was, Caleb's latest post. A picture of him on a yacht in the Caribbean, a girl in a bikini on each arm, holding a bottle of champagne. The caption read, "Work hard, play harder." Work hard. I looked at his smiling, tanned, carefree face, and then I looked around my own small, quiet apartment. I looked at my hands, the nails short and unpolished. I thought about the long hours I worked. I thought about the student loans I was still paying off chip by chip. I thought about the $500 he had laughed at. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sad. I felt angry. It was a cold, quiet anger, a slow-burning fire deep in my gut. It wasn't a loud, explosive rage that wanted to scream and break things. It was a focused, determined heat. They thought I was nothing. They had treated me like I was nothing. They had left me with nothing. Fine. I would build a goddamn empire from nothing. I slammed the laptop shut. I was done watching his life. I was done letting his actions dictate my emotions. His world with its easy money and fake smiles was no longer my concern. My world was right here in the small apartment, and it was time to start building. Instead of fighting them, I decided to fight for myself. My revenge wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. My revenge would be my own success. My revenge would be a life so well built and so full of peace and solitude that their world of chaos and cruelty couldn't even touch its edges. That night, I made a plan. I was good at my job as an accountant, but I wanted more. I wanted to be an expert. I decided right then and there to study for the CPA exam, the Certified Public Accountant exam. It was notoriously difficult, a series of 4 grueling tests that most people failed at least once. Passing it would open up new doors. It would mean more money, more respect, and more opportunities. It would be my way out, my escape from the life they thought I was destined for. My life changed overnight. Every minute that I wasn't at my full-time job was dedicated to studying. I woke up at 5 in the morning to get in 2 hours of studying before work. I spent my lunch breaks with flashcards instead of colleagues. I came home, ate a quick dinner, and studied until my eyes burned and the words started to blur. My weekends, once a lonely expanse of time, disappeared into a blur of textbooks, online lectures, and practice exams. I saved money with a ferocity I didn't know I possessed. I canceled my cable. I stopped eating out entirely. I brewed my own coffee at home. Every extra dollar went toward paying down my student debt or into my savings account. I was living on the bare minimum, but for the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. I was in control of my destiny. It was the loneliest period of my life. There were nights when I was so tired and overwhelmed that I would just lay my head down on my textbook and cry, certain I couldn't go on. I missed having friends. I missed having a life. But then I would think of Caleb's laugh on the phone. I would think of my parents' smirks in the lawyer's office, and I would get a drink of water, splash some on my face, and open my textbook again. It took me 3 years. 3 years of relentless, grinding work. 3 years with no vacations, no new clothes, no social life. But I did it. I passed all 4 sections of the CPA exam on my first try. The day I got the official letter in the mail, I held it in my hands and felt a profound sense of accomplishment that was deeper and more real than any inheritance could ever be. This was mine. I had earned this with my own mind and my own sweat. No one had given it to me, and no one on earth could ever take it away from me. With my new certification, I got a new job. I became a financial auditor for a prestigious firm downtown. My specialty became forensic accounting, tracking fraud, mismanagement, and financial crimes. I was good at it. My serious, meticulous nature, the very thing my family had always criticized as a flaw, was my greatest professional asset. I could look at a spreadsheet and see a story. I could follow a trail of numbers and find the lie hidden within. I quietly built a reputation for being thorough, precise, and unshakably ethical. I didn't plot revenge against my family. I didn't have to. I just focused on my work, on building my life one balanced ledger at a time. I didn't know it then, but my new career path was putting me on a direct collision course with my brother's crumbling empire. I wasn't watching him anymore, but I had a feeling that his foundation of easy money was riddled with cracks. And sooner or later, something was going to break. Caleb's idea of making the money multiply was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had never earned an honest dollar in his life. He didn't invest in stable index funds or blue-chip stocks. He poured money into high-risk, high-reward ventures that his equally reckless friends told him about at bars. He got involved in a shady real estate deal with a developer who had a history of bankruptcy. He invested a huge sum in a cryptocurrency that promised impossible returns and then vanished overnight. And as I would later learn, he gambled a lot. Online poker, sports betting. If he could risk money on it, he did. He was a minnow trying to swim with sharks, and he was bleeding money. To keep up appearances, to continue funding the lavish lifestyle he was broadcasting to the world, he started making desperate, foolish moves. He took out huge loans against the estate. He sold off parcels of the land my grandmother had cherished, land that had been in our family for generations. He was like a man trying to fill a bucket with a massive hole in the bottom, pouring money in as fast as it was draining out. I knew none of this at the time. I was completely absorbed in my own life. I was working on a major audit for a large investment bank. My firm had been hired to review the accounts of dozens of smaller companies the bank did business with. It was routine work, tedious but important, a forest of spreadsheets and transaction logs. One afternoon, I was deep into the financials of a small LLC, a shell corporation with a generic-sounding name like Apex Holdings. As I dug into the transaction records, I saw a pattern that made the hairs on my arms stand up. There were large, unexplained cash withdrawals, all just under the $10,000 legal reporting limit. The numbers weren't adding up. It was a classic red flag for embezzlement or money laundering. My job was to follow the trail. I started digging deeper, cross-referencing account numbers and wire transfers, losing track of time as I fell down the rabbit hole. And then I saw it, a name I recognized on a wire transfer authorization. The owner of the LLC was one of Caleb's old fraternity brothers, a man I met a few times who always struck me as having the ethics of an alley cat. The transfers were going from the LLC to a private trust. Out of a sudden, sickening professional curiosity, I ran a search on the trust. My blood ran cold. The sole beneficiary was Caleb Monroe. My heart started pounding in my ears. He was embezzling from his own trust fund. He had set up a convoluted scheme with his friend to move money out of the trust in a way that he thought was untraceable, likely to hide it from creditors or to pay off his massive gambling debts without leaving a clear paper trail. It was sloppy. It was arrogant. He thought no one would ever look. He thought no one would ever notice. He had always believed he was invincible. I sat back in my chair, the air in my office suddenly feeling thin and hot. Here it was, the proof of everything he was. The fraud, the deceit, the utter recklessness. It was all laid out in front of me, in black and white numbers. I had a choice. I could ignore it. I could delete the file from my review queue and pretend I never saw it. I could recuse myself from this part of the audit, citing a vague personal conflict of interest. It would be the easy thing to do. It would be the safe thing to do. But my entire career, the life I had painstakingly built from the ashes of my old one, was based on integrity, on following the numbers wherever they led, on telling the truth, no matter how ugly or complicated it was. Was I going to throw all of that away to protect the brother who had laughed at me when I was at my lowest? To protect the family that had discarded me like a piece of trash? No. I took a deep breath. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't call the police. I didn't leak the information to the press. I simply did my job. I methodically documented my findings. I highlighted the discrepancies. I followed the protocol of my firm to the absolute letter. I wrote up a clear, concise, and emotionless report detailing the suspicious activity, citing the account numbers, the dates, and the amounts. I didn't mention my relationship to Caleb Monroe. I didn't have to. I was just the auditor, an impartial observer of facts. I flagged the file for immediate and urgent review by our senior partners in the firm's legal department. Then I clicked Submit. And I let the system, a system of rules and consequences he never thought applied to him, do its work. Things moved with astonishing speed after that. My firm, legally obligated to report suspected financial crimes, passed my findings on to the authorities. The discrepancy I had flagged was a single loose thread. When the IRS and the SEC started pulling on it, Caleb's entire fraudulent sweater unraveled. They launched a full-scale investigation into his finances. They looked at everything: the shady real estate deal, the cryptocurrency scams, the embezzlement from the trust. They subpoenaed his bank records and his gambling accounts. They found years of tax evasion, wire fraud, and a mountain of hidden debt. Within months, it was all over. Caleb's assets were frozen. The cherry red sports car was repossessed from the driveway. The bank accounts were seized. And the family estate, my grandmother's house, the symbol of his entire inheritance and my family's betrayal, was slapped with a federal lien so large it was insurmountable. It was sold at a government auction to pay off a fraction of his debts and back taxes. The mansion he had mocked me from, the place where he had hosted his lavish parties and lived like a king, was gone. Sold to a stranger. Just like that. I read about the auction in the local paper online. I felt a strange, profound sense of calm. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was just quiet. It was the feeling of a story coming to its natural, inevitable, and logical end. He had promised my parents he would make the money multiply. Instead, he had made it all disappear. And I never had to lift a finger. The silence from my family, the one that had stretched on for years like a vast cold desert, broke suddenly and loudly. The first call came from my mother. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. Her message was frantic, the words tumbling over each other. "Jessica, it's your mother. Please, you have to call me back. It's an emergency. A terrible emergency. It's about Caleb." I listened to the message 3 times, my hand resting on my kitchen counter. The panic in her voice was real. The cool authority and coldness were gone, stripped away and replaced by a raw, desperate fear. A part of me, a small, wounded part that I wasn't proud of, felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. But mostly, I just felt tired, so incredibly tired. I didn't call her back right away. I needed to think. What did they want from me? What could they possibly expect me to do? The calls kept coming, becoming more frequent. From my mother, from my father. They left message after message, each one more panicked than the last. "Jessica, the IRS is involved. They've taken everything, Jess. The house is gone. Your brother could go to prison, to actual prison." Finally, after 2 days of their relentless barrage, I decided to answer. It was my father, Richard, this time. "Jessica," he said, his voice strained and thin, a shadow of the booming, confident voice I remembered. "I'm here," I said calmly. "Thank God," he breathed, a wave of palpable relief in his voice. "Jess, we need your help. You have to help us." "Help with what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's Caleb. This whole thing is a terrible misunderstanding. Some bad investments, that's all. He was just in over his head. But these people, they're treating him like a criminal. They've frozen everything. We have to hire lawyers, good ones. But we don't have any money. The house is gone." He paused, waiting for me to jump in, to offer a solution, to make it all better, like I used to with my scraped knees and failed projects. I stayed silent. He continued, his voice taking on a pleading, wheedling tone I had never heard from him before. "You're good with money, Jess. You're a CPA. You understand all this complicated stuff. Can you look at his books? Can you find a way to fix this? Can you help save your brother?" Save your brother. The same brother who had gloated over my disinheritance. The same brother who had laughed in my face when I asked for my own money back. They had never once called to ask if I needed saving when I was drowning in student debt. They had never cared about saving me. But now that their golden child was in trouble, they came running to the daughter they had thrown away. "No," I said. The word was simple, quiet, and absolute. It landed in the space between us like a block of granite. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean, no?" my father stammered, as if the word was a foreign language. "I mean, no," I repeated, my voice steady as a rock. "I can't help him. And I won't." "But he's your brother," he finally yelled, the desperation turning to the familiar anger I knew so well. "He's family. Family is supposed to help each other." "Is it?" I asked, and the quiet question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of years of evidence to the contrary. "Is that what we are? A family?" He didn't have an answer for that. A few days later, my mother called again. This time her approach was different. She was crying, a tactic she'd used on me my whole life to get her way. "I don't know what to do, Jessica," she sobbed into the phone. "Your father is a mess. Caleb, he's not handling this well. He could lose everything, his entire future." I listened patiently, my heart a hard, still stone in my chest. I felt a distant, detached pity for her, but it was like watching a movie. The emotions were happening on a screen, far away from me and my life. "We were thinking," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper between sobs, "you've done so well for yourself. You have a good job, you have savings. We know you do. Maybe you could loan Caleb some money, just to get him back on his feet, to pay for a good lawyer. He'll pay you back. I'll make sure of it this time." And there it was, the ultimate, breathtaking irony, the final absurd twist of the knife they had been plunging into my back for years. They wanted me to give my hard-earned money, the money I had scraped and saved while they were buying luxury cars and funding his party lifestyle, to the person they chose over me. They wanted me to fund his rescue from a disaster of his own making. I almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive. "Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm, like you would speak to a child who doesn't understand the world, "listen to me. Caleb was given everything. He had every advantage, every opportunity. He was given a $2 million head start in life. He chose to throw it all away. He chose to break the law. Those were his choices. I cannot fix what he chose to destroy." She started to protest, to argue, her sobs turning into angry, frustrated shouts. "I have to go," I said, cutting her off cleanly. "I wish you all the best." And I hung up the phone. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was the last time we would speak for a long, long time, if ever again. I had given them my final answer. The door, which they had closed on me years ago, was now locked. From my side. They had made their world, and now they had to live in it. And I, finally, was free to live in mine. In the end, Caleb took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to tax evasion and wire fraud. He avoided a long prison sentence, but he was given 5 years of probation and ordered to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. He would be paying off his debts for the rest of his life. My parents, with no savings of their own, downsized to a small rental apartment on the other side of town. Their golden son, the center of their universe, was now a convicted felon in his 30s, living with them, his bright, promising future extinguished. I never gloated. I never called them to say, "I told you so." I never wrote a single angry post on social media. There was no satisfaction to be found in their misery. Their downfall didn't make my past hurt any less. It just made it quieter. The roaring fire of injustice had dwindled to embers. My revenge was never about their destruction. It was about my construction. I continued to build my life brick by brick. I saved my money, and a year after Caleb's sentencing, I bought my own home. It wasn't a sprawling estate like my grandmother's house. It was a small, cozy bungalow with a little garden in the back and a porch swing out front. But it was mine. Every floorboard, every window, every blade of grass was a testament to my own hard work and resilience. I filled my new home not with expensive things, but with good people. I made friends, real friends, who celebrated my successes without jealousy and listened to my worries without judgment. We had barbecues in my backyard. We drank wine on my porch. My house was filled with the easy, genuine laughter that had always been missing from my childhood home. But there was still one loose end, one final thing I needed to do, not for them, but for myself. I needed closure. One rainy Sunday afternoon, I sat down at my kitchen table with a pen and a single piece of nice stationery. I decided to write them a letter. It wasn't a letter of anger or accusation. I had written those in my head 1,000 times. This one was a letter of truth. I wrote, "Dear Mom and Dad, I've been thinking a lot about the past few years, about the choices that were made. For a long time, I was hurt and angry. I couldn't understand why you did what you did. But I think I'm starting to see things more clearly now. You cut me out of the will because you thought Caleb needed the help and I didn't. You saw my independence as a sign that I didn't need you. You thought you were giving him a foundation and that I had already built my own. In a way, you were right. I did build my own. You cut me out because you thought I was nothing without your support. I hope now you see that the silence and the struggle you put me through forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. Silence and self-respect built me more than your inheritance ever could. I am not writing this to make you feel guilty. I am writing this to let you know that I am okay. I am more than okay. I have a life that I am proud of, a home that I love, and a sense of peace that I earned. I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. I forgive you for the favoritism, for the betrayal, and for the years of making me feel invisible. I am letting go of the pain. I am letting go of the hope that you will ever change. I will always be your daughter, and you will always be my parents, a fact of biology. But I cannot be a part of the cycle of favoritism and drama anymore. I am closing this chapter of my life. I wish you peace. Sincerely, Jessica." I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and mailed it. I didn't expect a reply, and I never got one. And that was okay. The letter wasn't for them. It was for me. It was the final brick in the foundation of my new life. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't about saying what they did was okay. It's not about letting them back into your life to hurt you again. It's about taking the knife they stuck in your back, pulling it out yourself, and letting the wound finally heal. It's about realizing that their story, with all its drama and tragedy, no longer has to be your story. My story is one of a woman who was discarded but refused to be trash. A woman who was erased but wrote her own future. A woman who found that the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, but the quiet, unshakable strength that comes from building a life on your own terms. Have you ever been erased, overlooked, or cut out by the very people who should have valued you most? Share your experience in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories of betrayal, survival, and poetic justice, because sometimes silence speaks louder than revenge.